Welcome back to Incubate Talent, where today we have a special episode with Calvin Briggs, shot at Innovation Depot in Birmingham, Alabama. During this episode, Calvin helps spotlight the thriving Birmingham STEM ecosystem and the important work of the Southern Center. He'll also discuss the Alabama STEM Council and Foundation and share some great insights as an educator in mathematics and relatable perspective as a parent. Calvin is an amazing leader, not just in the Birmingham community, but statewide, as a future maker that I feel fortunate to have the opportunity to meet and learn from. We look forward to sharing this episode with you. Thanks for joining us at Incubate Talent, and please don't forget to follow and subscribe. All right, welcome back to Incubate Talent, and today we are here on site at Innovation Depot, and we have joining us Calvin Briggs. Calvin, I appreciate you jumping on and taking the time to speak with us today.
The pleasure is all mine.
So let's start just an introduction of yourself. You and I, we're getting to know each other well. Fascinating guy, you're doing such amazing work. But let's start with your background and help listeners understand a little bit about the Southern Center too.
Okay, so if I had to start back from the very beginning.
Long time ago.
So born and raised in Asbury Park, New Jersey. So from the East Coast, my parents, my uncles, all from Clarksdale, Mississippi.
Okay.
In the Delta. So a lot of that tenacity, perseverance, definitely seeped into my spirit growing up. Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier about learning how to change oil.
Yep.
Tear down engines. Making
go-karts. Yeah.
I mean, we built things. Mm-hmm. We couldn't afford to buy a lot of things, but we built a lot of stuff growing up. And go-karts were one of them, taking apart lawnmower engines and all that kind of crazy stuff.
That's important skills.
Yeah. It just demonstrated the level of creativity and innovation we had as children, mm-hmm. and never even realized what we were doing.
Right.
And I think that was probably those earliest times were the things that kind of motivated me to go into STEM. I never knew I would be in this space growing up. I didn't understand my love for math. I was an artist. Mm-hmm. I created a lot of things with paint and brushes, but I was creating things I wanted to build. So architecture, buildings, all my uncles were in the construction space. So I would go on job sites and watch them build things from the ground up.
Rubbed off a little bit?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Civil engineering, all that stuff. I mean, I was just intrigued by watching things be built. And so that translated very well into my level of creativity, because I could imagine things before you could actually construct it. So I think that had a huge impact on shaping me as a young man. So, and then when I went into the STEM space and started studying architecture, I understood that math was the language I needed to master. So I fell in love with geometry.
And at what age would you say that happened? Like, was that middle school, high school, or did it take you getting to college? Because you were an ASU grad, right?
So I started out in high school. I remember my senior year, and don't you follow in my footsteps. So senior year, my math teacher threatened to fail me with an administrative failure. This was in calculus. And the reason she threatened me is because I never turned in my homework, but I will always ace every test. And she threatened me with administrative failure because she knew, she knew I was good and I was being lazy. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget it because I aced that final.
And fast forward a little bit, and you're
and I
professor teaching math, right? Yeah.
So I learned that the process was more important than the outcome. Mm-hmm. And students, we get caught up with grades. Did I get an A? Did I get a... The best grade I ever got was when I was at the University of Alabama in grad school. I got a C in statistics, but I was taking business statistics in the B school. Mm-hmm. And so I counted that as like my most treasured grade because it was a challenge.
Took a lot of work. Yeah,
took a lot of work.
Going through the slog and studying, and depending on the professor that you have too, right? That could be an accomplishment. Yeah.
No, it definitely was. So quickly learned that process is more important than outcome. Mm-hmm. And so with math and anything STEM related, It's the process. It's the ability to problem solve, to work through and create something that you probably never even imagined could be created from that thing. And so when I was teaching mathematics, I will always tell my students, you could say and do anything in my class you want. However, the only thing I ask is that you explain it, and explain it in the language that I'm teaching you, which was geometry, mathematics, postulates, and theorems. If you could explain it to me, it doesn't have to be right, as long as you do a good job explaining it.
And that helps. Like sometimes being a teacher yourself, and having to go through that process and explain it to somebody is a great process of learning.
Well, that is learn. Mm-hmm. Part of learning is understanding the language that we use to try to teach and communicate in.
Yeah.
Every profession has its language. And if you're not privy to that language, it's like listening to two MDs talk about prognosis. It's like, what are you saying? And so when you understand the language, it gives you an inside track on what's going on.
Yep.
So it's really important. But all those things have really impacted my life and the birth of the Southern Center. And so the Southern Center was birthed out of this idea around STEM that I kind of witnessed firsthand as a K-12 teacher, as a community college instructor, as a graduate school teacher teaching other professionals. No one really knew how to apply what we were learning. And if you separate all the bureaucracy of teaching, because teaching is a profession and there's a lot of bureaucracy in it, rarely does a teacher get a chance to teach in the way they ideally want to teach. You go into a class and say, hey, what do y'all want to learn today? No, the curriculum is outlined by the state. The principal tells you what the benchmarks are for this year. There are tests that need to be taken at the state level that we have to master. And if our school doesn't pass those tests, then we're going to be on the warning list. So there's a lot of politics and bureaucracy in education.
Did you see a gap then, I guess, in just as far as the translation to workforce and actually getting students into...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's part of the bureaucracy, because when you're talking about workforce development, business owners don't care about that bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. What they want is the final product, which is a student, an educated student.
Yep. Yeah.
And so they probably have the same lens that I currently have about education, that in its purest form, yes, is great. But because we have so many layers of bureaucracy in education, it moves too slow.
Yeah.
It's very clunky.
Well, and that's where, STEM is a fascinating. It's been around for a long time, and I think we've been in some conversations and just how it's evolved in different ways that it's kind of being incorporated in schools, or the barriers and why it's not being incorporated, to its fullest degree. There needs to still be focus on reading, right?
Right.
And some of those things, but it is probably one of the better conduits that I think a school or even outreach groups could do to help translate skills-based learning into a job role, right?
Absolutely. For instance, the question you get, when am I ever going to use this? You're solving equations. This doesn't even make sense. I'll never do this outside your classroom. Mm-hmm. And so it is our job. I think it's incumbent on every educator to be able to respond to that question.
And translate it somehow.
Correct. Yeah. And guess what? You may not have all the answers, but the response should be, let me find someone that can do a better job of communicating this to you than I can.
Yeah.
And we have access to so many people in so many different industries. And part of our job is to be advocates for STEM, right? Connect with people at Austell, Boeing, all these beautiful industries we got going on in the state of Alabama that could benefit from just sitting down with our students and explaining to them how this connects to your desire or your passion. And I think, when it comes to education, we know we have some school systems that have more resources than other systems. But I think the biggest resource we could have is the human resource, because we know that the student-teacher ratio is probably the most important. Because if I had 7 students in my class, I could give them that one-on-one attention and respond to questions in a way that I couldn't do if I had 40 students in the classroom. So that's a real issue, and that's something we're grappling with in Alabama, to try to find more high-performing teachers to teach math and science and reading and a lot of the other courses, history, because all these courses are all STEM. And I know some people may say, "Oh, it's not." I was like, "It is. You need to know how to read in order to master mathematics, physics, because communication is the key."
Great foundational base, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In history, just the history of Birmingham. Why is Birmingham Birmingham? Why are we even here? Who came up with the idea that Birmingham should be a city? Well, I could tell you, it's probably a lot of industrialists who came here during a period in time in our history where steel was the new innovation. It was brand new. People were using steel for railroads. We just started using steel for bridges, which most people would never cross a bridge made of steel. They didn't trust it. So
It was the STEM-based jobs of their time.
right.
Yeah.
And so that new innovation created a scenario where people start moving here to mine the coal, the limestone, all the natural ingredients for steel was located right here. If they weren't, Birmingham wouldn't exist. And so I always say it was STEM from the start. You have to look at the innovation that allowed something to kind of grow, and it grew exponentially.
And I love, as we get to tour around the state, it's amazing going to different communities and kind of learning about just some of the origin stories that may center around STEM in different industries, at different times. And yeah, Birmingham, both past and present, has a lot of great things that are going on. And so you all at the Southern Center, so we're talking about some of the challenges that teachers have. Skill-based learning in STEM, but it sounds like the Southern Center, you're doing some things in professional development to help those
Correct.
teachers? Yeah.
Correct. So the Southern Center, we focus on several areas. So advocacy is one of them, going out and telling the story, and basically just connecting the dots, just showing people why STEM is relevant and why it's important. It's important in history, important in reading, you name it, is important. Finance, important. Economic development, important. So we try to communicate that, but we also focus on outreach and enrichment to allow students, young individuals, to know this is important, as well as parents, because you are your son or daughter's first teacher. And if you have a fear of math, like a fear of dogs or a fear of anything, you transfer
it's going to rub off.
Yeah. You transfer it to your children. And so we have a mission to kind of elevate everyone within our community and just provide them with a better version of what STEM is. Forget how you did in math. Forget how, forget what happened in calculus class. And just think about it. How does this tie into my current reality? And my job is to help you be able to respond to that question.
And that's fascinating, because thinking about parents, right? And it comes up a lot on this podcast where we talk about different barriers, but families and households and some of the different challenges that they have. And yeah, you're right. It's like if they have a child that is maybe going down a different path than they do, or getting into something that maybe they don't quite understand or appreciate as much. What are some ways that you all at the Southern Center have helped kind of overcome challenges and help get parents to help, I'll say, support their kids? I think that's always a common thing. It's like parents always want the best for their kids and to be able to support them, but to be able to help them make that connection to support their STEM pathway. What's some ways that y'all have solved that challenge?
Well, number one, removing the intimidation factor. Again, I'm a math instructor, math professor, math teacher, and I remember when my son, who was in the 3rd grade at the time, I won't mention the school system or the school, but he came home and he had a D on one of his worksheets. And he's like, Dad, can you look at this? And I look. I like that. This is nice. This is good. I was like, what were you thinking when you did it this way? And he explained it to me. It made perfect sense. All the answers were correct.
Mm-hmm.
But he got D. So, of course, I had to have a conversation with his teacher. So that went on for maybe several weeks. So eventually I had to sit down with the teacher and the principal and the mentor. And it was that around the time when we introduced the new math. And they had to do it, the algorithm had to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so unfair, especially with my background.
You no doubt can offer a very fascinating perspective on the changes that have happened to math curriculum, and teaching at city schools and in higher ed. Yeah, what's your hot take?
And helping to draft the current course of study for mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
So I've gone through all these experiences, and I sat there with that teacher that day, and only had one question for her. I said, can you show me how you want my son to do it? And she started crying.
Oh, no.
She didn't know. She was an elementary school teacher. Some elementary school teachers have a very significant background, content-based in mathematics. Most don't, which is why most probably end up teaching elementary, because they don't want to be content-specific. They just want to teach a little of everything. Which is not necessarily the best format for teaching. I believe we should have content specialists at every level.
Yeah.
But she was not confident in her ability, which is why it was the ditto sheet. And okay, I won't use ditto because that's an old school term. It was a worksheet. And her crying was the response. And of course, they're like, oh, the meeting's over. But it never answered the question. From then on, my son had this stigma attached to him when it came to math, which is the same stigma that a lot of folks get in the second and third grade. It
happens.
And they carry it through middle school because now they don't see themselves as a math person or a science person, not realizing there's no such thing. There may be someone that can actually compute faster than you, could come up with an answer faster than you, but we all have the ability to think and problem solve.
Certainly.
And that's the only thing math really does. It's a tool. And some of us get turned off at a very early age. And that's so unfortunate. And that's one of my life's mission, is to just get people to feel comfortable about anything technology related, math related. We all can do these things, given enough time, right? But anyone can do it. And so that was another reason that gave birth to the Southern Center, because we tend to group people in these silos. You're a science person, you're a math person, you're this person. You're doing a podcast.
Never would have thought of
photography, right?
Right.
Everyone has a creative side. Everyone has a rational side. We're not just one-dimensional individuals. And so I think we need to feed every aspect of our life and cultivate it. And it overlaps. And that's why I say STEM from the start. Everything STEM related overlaps in your life every single day, from the buttons on your shirt.
Yeah, you can look at industrial designers helping make the things that are around us, and we call it STEM, but there's also STEAM and incorporation of the arts. And, we were talking about that before this, right? And just whether it's building a go-kart or kind of being around, the architecture and the construction and that creativity, you never know how you're going to use it later in life.
Correct.
The equation you're using in math, you may not actually use in a day job, as you get to be an adult, but it's helping you solve problems, right?
And to my engineers out there, structural, civil, whatever engineering you're in, everyone has their cheat sheet. I don't know any engineers that don't carry around their little pocket formula book or maybe it's on their phones now. But
something. Yeah.
everyone had their structural engineers had their little pocket.
Right.
That's
right.
correct.
So before we get too far off the Southern Center, so you're doing professional development, a lot of outreach, a lot of advocacy. I mean, are y'all creating internships? Or are you just going into schools?
We're going into schools at the K-12 level, but we're also working with undergraduates in terms of research. So we do research in two different areas. So we do research with undergraduates and graduate students. I also coach faculty.
Oh, okay.
We just completed a session with about 8 individuals who are submitting grants to the National Science Foundation. So we coach them through the proposal writing process.
That's great. Yeah.
Again, some people feel intimidated about engaging in certain activities because it's new to them. So
Grant writing, it's like, let's go back to that English class and,
Right.
why you need to write that paper.
and how AI can assist you
Oh,
in helping
yeah.
write.
Yep.
Because and since I mentioned AI, my English teachers were like, "No, it's cheating. AI wrote the paper." I was like, "Well, do you know AI? Did you realize AI wrote the paper?" Of course I did. I said, "Okay. So don't get rid of AI. Allow AI to be the reference guide to help you select literature and material that otherwise a student would have to spend time in the stacks of a library, right?" So use it as a research assistant and give voice to the student. So I tell my students, don't use your voice, write the prompt in your voice, select the types of databases and research material you think is pertinent, and then allow the AI tool to offer up new ideas to expand what you're currently doing.
It adds your own thoughts and legitimacy to it.
Correct.
Still teaches them to cite and source, but enables some creative thought, right? And that's
Right. And every graduate student will tell you they were the research assistant on multiple papers for their professors. But typically the professor got all the credit when they submitted it for publication. So whether it's AI or a physical person doing the research, we all have research assistants. So you think of this as a research assistant, and that's how it really should be used, not to replace me.
Certainly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm using it currently on a proposal, and it hasn't really done any of the initial creation. But it's been very useful to help kind of poke at and provide input or even score. It's been grateful from from that standpoint. We've talked about how to use it for video editing and all kinds of different things. And yeah, I mean, that could almost be its own episode, right? And how to help not just teachers, but school districts, because there's so many school districts that are in different parts of the journey, and whether or not they have policies and the ability to use it, their students are going to be trying to use it. And
so the best thing to do is
yeah.
direct and guide
Yes.
them on how to use it.
Right.
And I think that's the space we're currently in. It was like with cell phones. Who wants to fight cell phone usage in a school? I've been there, done that. It's horrible. You spend your whole day
Just put it away.
trying to
Put
keep
it
the
away.
phone out
Right.
of a student's hand. And you never get around to teaching.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is, how can I incorporate this in the lesson and use it as a tool to educate? And I think that's why our parents, that's the first thing they teach us. If they see us going in one direction, it's like, okay, this is a teachable moment right here.
Yep.
So, and I think that's the way we have to look at it. But even with AI, we've been doing a lot of workshops around AI, how you can use it as a research tool, incorporate it into your lessons, and not be intimidated by it.
And you're doing that for both teachers and students?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And is it like beyond the traditional use cases? I say like a traditional use case, but writing a paper and plagiarism, and now there's a lot of resources for teachers out there to be able to catch those things. How else are you seeing it used in a classroom?
Well, one thing you could do is the prompt is really,
Yeah,
it's all in the prompt.
Teaching prompt engineering is almost its own thing.
And I think one of the biggest barriers to actually completing a research paper is getting over the fact that you're writing a research paper.
Yeah.
It's just like, where do I start? How do I even begin? I'm not that great of a writer. So AI is great because guess what? It will fix the grammatic errors. It builds confidence in the writer, because when they look at what they just wrote and then AI rewrote it in a way they wish they could write, now AI is modeling for the student proper grammar in most cases. It's not 100% correct, but in most cases.
Yeah.
But I think it helps build confidence for a student who probably lacks a lot of confidence in their writing ability.
An area where I want to see it used more too, and we talked about the students at a certain age getting getting a stigma attached to them that, you know, kind of creates additional challenges and barriers to, you know, where they don't see themselves in a certain type of role. And it's hard, I think. I mean, it's one thing of how can I incorporate artificial intelligence or different technology in a classroom, but then translating that to how's it used in industry and workforce.
Right.
I think it's a good thing that industry can kind of step up to the plate and help show how artificial intelligence is disrupting their industry and being used in a certain job role, and in ways to maybe try and take that back to students. You know, I think it's beneficial not only to help them see people in certain job roles and get context of what Birmingham or Huntsville or like what those industries have to offer, but AI is here to stay, right?
It really is.
And it's starting to be used in these different jobs, and I think industry could play a big role in being able to help incorporate that more.
Well, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that they think AI, or depending on the tool you're using, because you have generative AI, you got a lot of different variations of AI and how it's being used, but you can use an open database or a closed database, right?
Yep.
So if you're using something like ChatGPT and it's randomly going out to just any old site, it may be pulling erroneous information, or at the very least making up stuff.
Right. Versus something that's trained
Correct.
to try and analyze the data and the problem that you're really trying to solve.
Yeah. And so if you're using closed databases or very specific sources of information, then that kind of, basically silos the information into verifiable information or vetted information versus whatever's out there floating around. And so it can be used in those two ways.
Yeah.
So, again, it's here to stay. And I think you still have to have knowledge of whatever the thing is you're doing to be able to at least look at the information to vet it to see if it's legitimate or not. And here's the other thing I think is a great teaching tool. Now that AI help you write your paper, go back and verify every single source.
Oh yeah. Yes, please. But I like the time that maybe it saved you in being able to write, some text in the voice that you were struggling to kind of get there. Like, take that time savings and actually go and do those things to be able to analyze it further. And that's kind of what excites me the most. I mean, the thought of how can this tool be used for humans to be able to solve new problems and ask new questions and be able to dedicate their time to other things. I know it's kind of an abstract thought, but it's exciting to see where it goes.
It's true. It's definitely true. One of the other things I wanted to mention about the Southern Center is that a lot of the research we do a lot of research for other businesses, mostly academic or educational support organizations. We'll go out and do external evaluations. One of the businesses that we've done a lot of work with, Complete College America, they had some funding with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to look at HBCUs and how they were actually incorporating technology and other innovations into learning. And so it's called the HBCU Digital Learning Infrastructure Project. And so as institutions are trying to figure out how to incorporate these new innovative tools into learning, they've kind of been slow to the table. But COVID forced a lot of institutions to just jump right in.
Oh yeah.
And so now that they've jumped in, the lessons learned, are they applying those lessons? Some folks have gone back to their old ways of paper pushing. They don't use DocuSign. They don't use any of the automation tools that they were exposed to during COVID. And so the question is why? And if we don't continue to try to keep up with this changing world in terms of technology, innovation, automation, we're going to get left behind. I have one colleague phrase it this way. He said, if you're not incorporating and innovating based on the current technology, he said, basically you're dying a slow, painful death.
And especially if you are an educator or an institution not evolving, right, and teaching others, it can be a hindrance, right, to the future of some, right, and being able to overcome some of those challenges, have some of those different kinds of resources. That's it's a major problem, right? Yeah.
Well, I think we get comfortable. I think most of our lives we strive for comfort and convenience. And when we get there, we're like, okay, I'm there. Not realizing you're a life learner. You're never there.
What's next?
You always got to be thinking what's next. And so I think that's another aspect, is a mindset. And you have to shift your thinking from I made it to where can I go next?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing about what we do as a center is that we don't want the light bulb to go off. People say things like, well, I just retired. I'm like, what does that mean? Or people will say, I retired from this position. Now I get to do
and going on to
something new.
Yeah.
And so I don't think this term retirement, you never retire. You just you change. And you move from one phase of your life to the next.
It could be, professional to hobbies and projects,
right?
Just depending on the person,
Look, if you guys like firing off rockets, we're going to be doing some rockets with students in June.
Are you? Okay.
Oh, yeah. We worked with the Bessemer Housing Authority, and we did the students built rockets after school. It was an after school activity. And we were right in their community at the Learning Center, right there in the housing projects. And we get to the point where we're launching the rockets. All the parents come outside.
Hey, that's great.
They're like, what's going on?
And but they, you got a tangible project, kids working on something they're excited about, and when a parent sees their kid get excited about something, they kind of get excited too. And we should learn from that, right?
Right.
I mean, that's
And that's the thing. We have this activity we call STEAM Saturdays, where every Saturday we're going to be somewhere. It may be in your community, it may be a local school throughout the summer, it may be at an institute or your church. But that's the best place to expose children and parents to these activities. We made ice cream. Now, the basis of the ice cream project was learning about thermodynamics. But forget the thermodynamics. Everyone had fun making ice cream in a bag.
Yep.
in the hot summer sun, right?
If you've never made homemade ice cream before, right? I mean, there's a process to it. You can learn a lot.
Look, and while they're eating the ice cream, we're talking thermodynamics. They're like, really?
Make it fun. Make it fun. Make it delicious too. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful, and you have such a great perspective, not only as like just an educator with your background, but somebody who has been in the Birmingham community for just so long and making such a difference. And whether that's the Southern Center or other things that you're doing, but for those listening that may not be familiar with Birmingham itself and what we call the STEM ecosystem. Let's just talk about that ecosystem for a second. Like how would you describe the Birmingham STEM ecosystem for a second, and then we can go into the things that are going well and maybe the things where there's still some work.
Well, the STEM ecosystem here in Birmingham is very vibrant. There's a lot going on from the McWayne Center There's a lot of activities going on at the local high school, Bush Hill STEAM Academy, right down the road, doing phenomenal work. They have an e-gaming program where the students are literally beating down the door to get in to this program. We have Parker High School, Ramsey High School, all heavily engaged in STEM activities. The biggest barrier, I think, is sharing that information with the community. Communications has been challenging because we tend to highlight the negative things going on in the community rather than all the exciting, new, innovative things going on. Mm-hmm. And if I could change one thing, is to change the way we communicate what's going well within the community. And STEM, by far, is one of the most promising things we could actually do because it involves everyone.
Yeah. You can connect it to so many things.
We're sitting here in Innovation Depot in the middle of Birmingham.
Yep.
And the whole premise of Innovation Depot is to help startups and community-based organizations here in Birmingham to manifest their ideas around anything. And like I said before, it's all STEM.
It is.
I mean, everything is STEM to me. And you could call it STEAM. You could call it STREAM. We could keep adding letters, but I think at some point we need to stop. But you could call it what you want. You could just say education. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. And we're lifelong learners, so we should always embrace education
and connect it within the community.
Correct.
Right? And that lack of connection, I still don't. It's kind of what was the passion to get some of this started, is just, observing maybe some of the lack of connection or just like the average student, parent, teacher, community, like not knowing, like you said, not knowing the good news, and the positive things that are happening, some of the resources that are at their disposal. And, I still don't know that we have a good answer for exactly how to solve it. It's not necessarily a channel, a podcast, and a YouTube channel, necessarily. And every community is different, has different barriers that they have to overcome to be able to help that. What do you see needing to happen in Birmingham, to be able to help overcome some of those barriers?
Well, I think it's the way we communicate. Have you ever heard a story and the first time you hear it, you have one impression of the story, but maybe the second or third time you hear it, you kind of garnered something new from the story, mm-hmm. gleaned something new from the story. And it all depends on the storyteller.
That's true, yeah.
Some people just do a better job of communicating ideas. Or maybe it's because of the individual. Maybe I've matured. Maybe I have a better point of reference at a certain age, or, a different framework. But everyone can tell the same story in a different way. And it could resonate a lot louder based on who the individual is. One of the things I used to tell my students when it came to mathematics, I was like, if you don't like the way I'm telling you how to solve equations, I said, do you like rap music? He was like, yeah. So I would go to YouTube on my smartboard and pull up a rap about solving equations.
Hey, that's great.
Yeah. There's so many different variations mm-hmm. of what I teach through someone else's lens. And I'm like, if I'm boring, if my voice is monotone, you're just not getting it.
Yeah.
There's someone out there that could translate it to you in a better way.
Through a channel that maybe you want to receive it, right? It could be through music. And I mean, it's often talked about how important identity is, and whether it's seeing somebody in that job role and do they look like me or different things. I mean, identity is critical.
It really is.
Talk to me about that for a second. So, I mean, thinking about, a student in Birmingham understanding what jobs are available to them and ways that maybe industry could even help with, identity and helping a kid imagine seeing themselves in that kind of job role?
Identity is probably the most important thing. When I grew up, most of the scientists that I could point to and tell you without a doubt they were a scientist had to you have to be white, gray hair, bearded, or maybe not. Einstein didn't have a beard, but a lot of scientists, the imagery, the cartoons, everything we saw told you what a police officer looked like, what a scientist looked like, what a teacher should look like, what your parents should look like. Now, in this day and age, there are so many different variations of all those things I just listed.
Yeah.
And you can't say that they're not what they are. We just have we have a broader view of what that individual or that profession is now. And back when I was growing up, we had a very small, narrow view of what we thought about certain identities, right? Yeah. So I think it's really essential today for students to see themselves in certain spaces. And I'll say specifically for minorities and women. Even today, I mean, you can't imagine in 2025 that we still struggle to persuade women to go into engineering fields, right? Rarely when you walk into a civil engineering office will you see a woman, because we've always kind of catered toward men in terms of Tonka trucks and digging and playing in the dirt and all these other things that weren't ladylike, right?
Yep.
And so as a society, we have to kind of grapple with what we're doing to our human resources, which are our children. They're the future. So if we're not teaching them or preparing them for the potential of going into now, we're living in an era that's highly technological. And if you don't have a basic foundation in programming, understanding math and science at the very basic levels, it's going to be very difficult for you to really secure the type of job and the lifestyle that you want in life. And so, I think identity is something that we all need to pay very close attention to. And even with a coach, if you're...
in sports and stuff, or life coach, it could be anything.
So you need people to help help you navigate that process. And most people will follow people that make them feel comfortable. The first, Nick Saban, if Nick Saban was here and he wanted to recruit me for the Crimson Tide, he wouldn't, but if he were.
I'm a mathematician, sir. Yeah.
I could help you come up with some plays. But guess who he would talk to first? He'd go to my parents. Because he knew once he won over my parents, he could win me over. Yeah. And that, I always say we could learn something from coaches as academics, because they involve the entire family, the community. Because if the community sold on you, it's like, man,
come on,
you go to Alabama.
Yeah.
So I think, that feeds into my identity of myself. Because identity, I don't shape my identity. Matter of fact, I'm the last person to shape my identity.
We kind of conform in a way to a lot of the things around our environment and things that we're exposed to.
Our parents, our teachers, our friends shape us.
Yeah.
I love when I hear students, anybody really, well, that's who I am. I was like, no, who you are when you are whose you were. That's who you are.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you didn't just pop out this person.
Here I am.
You were shaped by the community that helped shape you. So that's identity. And so when we leave our community and we don't see people who shaped us in these spaces, we probably don't feel wanted or needed, which is why it's so important to try to, in an ideal world, if we're doing a research study, we want a population that's representative of that particular area that we're doing research on. If this was a medical study for a drug, we want a representative population to see how all these different varied individuals react to that same medication so we can get a good take on the impact of it. But when it comes to our careers and education, shouldn't it be representative?
Definitely.
So we still got a long way to go in that regard. But I think it's part of our jobs to make sure that we have the same level of encouragement for our daughters and our sons as they move through, from K-12 to undergrad to graduate school into careers. So definitely, I think identity is really important, and we need to do a little bit more to foster a really substantive identity within our students.
And it takes everybody, right? I mean, it's going to take the educators, it's going to take industry helping with identity and showing students in those job roles, but man, it takes parents too. I mean, as two dads that have daughters, we have talked about this, right? And I'll never forget. It was a training quite a few years ago. I was working for an engineering company, and the guy I was talking to was an engineer, and we were going through these workshops and talking about different ways to kind of develop talent. And it was brought up, one of the only female engineers that was in the room kind of brought up the fact that that the workforce and the identity and her peers, that just women weren't well represented in engineering fields. And it led to just this, conversation amongst parents. And some of the dads, we all kind of, raised our hand and kind of spoke up and expressed some frustration, right? And the ways that you're right, we as society kind of create these things, these stigmas, right, that even limit our daughter's ability to imagine themselves in a certain kind of role. What would you say as a parent and a dad? What are some strategies that you have taken to help get your daughters down their pathways, or just encourage them to be their own people?
Well, I think I encourage my children to be their own people, and my wife also, to our own detriment. But I think that's something you have to do, because no matter how great of a dad or mom you are, your students or your children are going to end up having to make the final decision. And I think one thing we did with our children is that Elijah, my son Elijah, and my daughter Micah, they were brought up in all things STEM, but they were also brought up in all the cultural aspects of life as well, in terms of museums, just being creative and being able to understand history. Our history as African Americans in this country, and more broadly, American history, world history. We traveled, Rome, Italy, Tanzania, Mexico. We've been all over the place. That was really important for them to have a worldview of where we live. And so I think a combination of all those things have really shaped, like I said, to my own detriment, our children to making their own decisions. Very, very free thinking individuals. But that's what you want, because innovation comes from this notion that I have the ability to create.
And think maybe outside of what I might have, and the tunnel vision that we all kind of develop in our own communities. That's what I love, like getting out of my own comfort zone of Huntsville and coming down to Birmingham and other communities and learning about the history. It's, you need to do it. We need more of that for our kids.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the earlier the better, because we remove that stigma. Because if left to our own devices, we probably live and die in that same 3-mile radius that we grew up in, because it's comfortable. And we know those folks, and they're cool, and they take care of us. It's hard to venture outside of your community. I mean, going away for school. I mean, we're excited, but then we're like, oh, mom's not going to be there. Dad's not going to be there. So we have to create an environment where our children feel comfortable about venturing off into something new and different. It may not feel comfortable at first, but you have all the tools and resources you need in order to, and you have to feel that you have all those resources in order to feel like you're going to be successful in whatever it is you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's difficult. It
is. Yeah.
It's a challenge for any parent.
And, everybody has their own challenges too. So what's your thoughts on like barriers and ways to overcome access? I mean, we're talking about the Birmingham STEM ecosystem, a lot of different backgrounds, and, every community, every family is going to have their differences. We're talking about identity. What about strategies to overcome access problems?
Well, I think access is kind of interesting. I had a colleague, I took a group of students to University of Illinois, Chicago. And a lot of students, the first time out of Birmingham, got a chance to visit a lot of the sites around Chicago, went on campus. And one of the things we were having a discussion, and I was like, yeah, our students need to have greater access. He looked at me. Now, he was probably 20, 30 years my senior. And he said, we fought to get access. And from my perspective, from where I started, we have greater access than we've ever had before. The problem is mindset. We don't know we have access, or it never occurred to us, what are we seeking access to?
Yeah.
And so if you just use a term like education broadly, access to education, what does that mean? What type of education?
Yeah, we're just trying to elevate the school,
right?
Outreach activities in the community. Yeah, what does it mean? Yeah.
So you're still coming from that community that you're raised in. So if that community has not already cultivated in you the mindset of access and being more intentional about what that access looks like, you can have all the access in the world and not realize that these things are accessible to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes back to making that connection in a community of what resources are maybe available, and even once you have access to it, what do you do then?
That's the big question.
Right.
And so, do I have access to attend Harvard or Princeton or Stanford? Do I have access to walk into the football team? What are you seeking access to? And so I think that question is the most important part, because now you can be very intentional about the direction you're moving and the path you're taking. Mm-hmm. And so I think early on in elementary schools, students should be exposed to all things STEM, in addition to football, basketball, track and field, and all the sports. But we need to provide them with a broad range of opportunities. And I don't think we've gotten to that point yet, which is why the Southern Center and a lot of other nonprofits and institutes exist, because they're trying to promote, and you fill in the blank, right? So that advocacy piece is really important.
It is. Well, and on the topic of advocacy, let's switch gears and talk about other things happening both in community and the state level, like with the council and with the Alabama STEM Foundation. So you and I have the fortunate pleasure in helping lead one of those organizations with the foundation, and as we're forming that mission, advocacy was something that was brought up immediately as something that has to be core to our mission. What are your thoughts on just where we stand today as a state when it comes to STEM, and whether that's the programs of the council or even, what excites you for the future for what we can create with the foundation?
So the foundation was a natural evolution from the STEM Council. Mm-hmm. When we first set out to do this work, and I was approached with being a member of the STEM Council, of course I was going to join, because it actually provided me a vehicle in which to elevate the work that we're already doing here in the Birmingham community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if we could bring this to the state level, this would be outstanding. So I have to give credit to all the folks who were instrumental in getting this launched back in, what, 2017,
yeah.
2016, 2017. And so as we evolved from the STEM Council and formed the Alabama STEM Foundation, that was a fiduciary need to help support the activities of the STEM Council.
Beyond just state and legislative funds.
Correct, correct. Because we know, funding ebbs and flows.
Sure.
So we have to make sure we put, organizations in place to help kind of ease the pain when we're in that lull.
Mm-hmm.
So the Alabama STEM Foundation is just a needed organization in terms of supporting the work we're doing across the state. My hope is that we can get to the point where we could fund every single organization that knocks on the door.
Definitely. Yeah.
Because there's so much great work going on across the state, whether you've heard about it or not, right? So hopefully with your podcast, we're gonna get everybody.
That's the goal.
Podcast.
Continue spotlighting, increasing connection, and again, just trying to elevate the programs. Because I was walking around. I mean, as a professional, looking for talent, somebody passionate, about advocating for STEM and all of those. I got kind of frustrated that why don't more people know about this group that's doing great things in Birmingham or great things down south, and I think that the foundation plays a role, right, in helping be part of that advocacy voice and elevating communities and the programs in those communities, right?
Yeah, and it's not easy.
No.
Look, it wasn't easy teaching mathematics. I run to my old students all the time. Students like, I should have listened more. Or I have students like, that's the math teacher. But the thing is, we have to get out into the community. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really fun to talk about STEM, especially in ways that you never, ever thought about. And I could honestly say that if you talk to me and I don't at least give you a few good nuggets in terms of STEM and why it's important, I hadn't done my job. Mm-hmm. And I'm always going to take it back to the mathematics at some point. I'm like, so what are you doing?
Of course, yeah.
Because it's the universal language that we need to master in order to excel in these areas. And I had a debate with a former university president, and he said, no, reading is the most important thing you could learn. I said, no, it's mathematics. He's like, Briggs, you need to know how to read. If you're going to learn mathematics. I said, you're right. So I let him win that argument. But mathematics is language. Mm-hmm. And
it's problem solving.
One of the things I'm currently doing now is I'm studying Hebrew.
Really?
Yeah. I'm just fascinated by Hebrew, just the language, the numerical value, and the
because they can have different meanings and values. Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So they have a quantitative value, a numerical value, and a language. So, and you might think, okay, we have letters in the alphabet with numerical placement, but that's totally different. Mm-hmm. It actually has every single letter has a numerical value or quantitative interpretation of what it is. And I think that's fascinating.
Tell me you're a math nerd without telling me you're a math nerd. No, it is fascinating though.
It really is. Yeah. Because I look at the numbers now and I see Hebrew. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great though, and good for you for being a lifelong learner, right? And
would you like to join me?
Hey, I will. I'm fascinated by that, and yeah, I mean, again, is somebody kind of representing, the T in STEM. I mean, I love trying to immerse myself in, the science and the engineerings, and mathematics was always one that, like, I don't feel like early on I could really translate or explain the mathematical kind of pathways, that I
Hmm.
guess one could go down. I mean, certainly down, the overlap with engineering, I think makes a lot of sense. But there's so much to still learn and unpack there that, again, it depends on your perspective and your background. We all have things we can learn from each other,
Well,
for
think of
sure.
the Matrix. I don't know if you ever saw the
Oh, of
Matrix.
course, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
but just the whole Matrix, they made it look so cool. The math code, flashing, and he's like, oh, what is it saying?
Yeah.
Can you interpret that?
Math can be cool.
And Neo could read the code.
Hmm.
It's like, all I see is numbers. He's like, no, I see
That's
pictures.
it.
And I thought that was so cool because one of the things you learn, mathematics is a language that we use to try to interpret the world around us.
Hmm.
It's like, what's the distance from Earth to the sun? I don't know. Well, we do know approximately. Did we take a measuring tape and someone held the measuring tape on Earth and went to the sun? No. The beauty of mathematics is that you don't actually have to physically be
Good. Yeah.
there or go there or do it.
Hmm.
It's a tool that we use to describe things that we have no physical way of describing. Einstein described the black hole. And you're like, what?
Never been there,
Never
but
been there.
right.
I'm like, what? So I think it's amazing what we could do
It
with
is.
math.
It is. Yeah.
So and it's a code. And always as a kid, I always like feeling like I knew something that
Hmm.
somebody else didn't know.
Yeah. Well, Calvin, any other thoughts, events with the Southern Center or others? I meant to ask you about is it the MSI conference? Are y'all still planning to do one?
We had it.
Well, yeah, you had it. But
Yeah,
are you
yeah.
planning one for like later this year for 26?
Actually, this summer we have two tentative workshops. I'll
Okay.
call them workshops/summits. One is going to be around STEM research in the era of defunding. If you've been watching the news,
Hmm.
you should know by now that a lot of research opportunities for students have been disappearing at a very fast rate. I talked to two students who volunteered this past weekend, UAB students. They're in the engineering department. One was a civil engineer. We had an event at the Arlington Historic House, which is right here. I believe it's right here in West End. And we had some STEM activities around soil and water samples. So we're talking about how can you take a sample of your soil and determine what's in your soil. So we did that, and the same thing with water. And one of the students told me she was volunteering. She was like, I don't have an internship this summer. I'm like, why? She's like, I haven't been able to find one. So we have a lot of undergraduate students who don't have research opportunities, and they really need them. So,
And so you are creating them through some different means.
well, that's going to be the focus.
Hmm.
How can we do a better job of leveraging funding, whether it be from the state, local community, business, or revenue generating opportunities to support our students in research? Unfortunately, we cannot depend totally on grants and federal funding anymore.
Hmm.
That's pretty obvious. UAB has lost millions of dollars because of the new federal regulations around some of the
Oh
funding.
yeah, whether it's capping of the indirects or
Right.
just there not being
Hudson
certain
Alpha,
grants. Oh yeah, oh
yeah.
yeah, we're definitely feeling it.
Because y'all used to, I mean, y'all had tons of interns that you used to
Yeah, and
support.
I mean, I will say, like, our biotrain program is about to kick off again, bigger and better than ever. And so I think some of those things aren't falling off, but I think one of the reasons why it's still there, and yeah, like some of the research projects that some of them might be on, is no doubt changing, right? So their poster presentations and that output, there's still research problems to solve. Like the problems don't go away just because the funding does.
That's correct.
But the other reason why I think it's still successful and hasn't been impacted is because the internship placement isn't just us as Hudson Alpha, the research nonprofit. It's the 50 plus other companies on our campus also creating those opportunities. And so you have for-profit industry also showing up, helping make that connection with opportunities, but putting some kind of monetary skin in the game too to be able to continue trying to create those research projects. And that may be something to learn from, right?
You make a great point. And so one of the things we're doing with these two events, and more than likely it's going to be in June and July, more than likely here at Innovation Depot, but to just bring folks from the community together to have the conversation about what to do or to share resources they may have or opportunities.
Yep.
So I think that's what I'm really hoping to get out of it. But then a chance to build relationships as well. Because again, even here in Birmingham, there's a lot of folks who are doing a lot of great work that don't understand what's going on over at UAB or what's going on across town. We're working in silos.
Yep.
And so, one of my jobs is to help break down these silos. And so, maybe I should walk over to McWayne Center when I leave here.
I'll walk over there with you. But yeah, it's a role that we all play, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's the different organizations that we have, a Southern Center, a Hudson Alpha, or even just, leading things like the STEM Foundation and, the council. And, I get a lot of hope for what Alabama is doing in STEM and especially with things happening at the federal level. I think that the council going under Department of Workforce, things getting codified, which is a huge deal, and leaders such as yourself helping make that connection in community. I think the future is bright for Alabama. There's still a lot of work to do, and it's going to be a continuous thing in trying to train the next generation. But I get a lot of hope out of Alabama.
No, I love Alabama. I think Alabama is ahead of the curve in so many ways, especially in STEM. As I travel around the United States, a lot of states are doing some good things. But Alabama, I'm so proud of what we're doing and how we've got it done over these past, like I said, since 2016 in terms of moving the STEM Council, getting it approved, getting it codified, and also the evolution of the Alabama STEM Foundation. So we're just getting started with that, but it's rolling along, and we're going to have some new exciting things to share with the public soon, right?
Yes, we are. Yes,
Okay.
we are. Looking forward to it. Awesome. Well, hey, Calvin, again, thank you for joining us and all of your leadership. I mean, the things that you're doing both with Southern Research and your involvement just in STEM, both in this community and the state level. It's incredible, and love learning from you. I'm not great in math, but I think I can learn a few things from you.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
And make sure you go out and visit us on YouTube, Southern STEM Center on YouTube. And also we have a podcast coming out on Spotify in June. So please come out and check us out.
Check them out. Yeah. Thanks again, Calvin.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to Calvin for sharing the Southern Center's impactful work in Birmingham's STEM community. We also appreciate your leadership and insights in the importance of identity and access in STEM across Alabama. Please check out the description of this episode for links to learn more about how to get involved and help support the Southern Center and check out their content. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to subscribe for more episodes and share with others to help connect STEM across your communities. Thanks again for listening to Incubate Talent and helping build your STEM ecosystem.